One of my fears about the whole social media, having written extensively in the past on things like Conservative Home, is it's a very asymmetric thing, particularly if you're a public person like myself in the public domain as an elected politician, is it's very asymmetric in terms of legal redress. You can say things and people can certainly attack you, but if they attack you in an ad hominem fashion and besmirch you with absolutely no evidence, there's no comeback in terms of, you know, if there's a newspaper who says something about you, you know where to go. You can go to your lawyer, you can go to the Press Complaints Commission. And one of the problems that politicians face is that they can be attacked and people can throw an awful lot of mud at you if people don't like you for whatever reason, and you have no way of actually correcting it or rectifying it or even suing those for damages. So that does worry me slightly. I think many politicians are nervous about going onto social media because they fear that they could be attacked in a personal way, or even their families, or be threatened or whatever, and they have no way of actually identifying the source of those attacks.
Do you think that the way that you use Facebook and Twitter is fairly representative of Conservative British MEPs, or even British MEPs more generally?
Well, I would say that in my delegation of Conservative MEPs, only about a quarter actually on social media. That also reflects probably the age profile of our delegation. I think the newer arrivals are doing it more than the older generation. So I think this is like a transitional period when people, following the next year's elections, when, goodness knows what will happen, but there may be one or two new faces. I suspect that people of a younger profile and new to the Parliament will be more likely to tweet than those who have been around for 10 or 20 years in office.
For sure, it's raising now the interest of some citizens. This is probably through social media, or thanks to social media, the first time that we can really interact outside the typical Brussels bubble. And you see that in all the member states, there's a huge quantity, a huge amount of people who are interested in not only in being informed about the European Parliament, but which is much more interesting or important for us to interact with the Parliament, to interact with the MEPs, because what they want is not to discuss with the institution as such. People is not interested in institutions, people is interested in people. So in this case, in the MEPs. And the way they start interacting in these last 2 or 3 years, in my opinion, means that for the first time, next elections of 2014 will be the elections where there will be a real debate outside the media, and I would say also outside the borders of the member states. Because when you see, for example, the Facebook page of the European Parliament with almost 800,000 followers right now, which means the second institution in the world in number of followers after the White House, these people are debating among them, and they are debating about the same issues, and they come more or less with the same opinions. It doesn't matter if they are Romanian or British or Spanish or Swedish. At the end of the day of the discussion, you see that they are reacting much more as European citizens, as normal people, than from a quite national point of view. In this discussion, we, the media directorate of the press services of the Parliament, in fact, what we have to be able to do before the elections is to transform this discussion between people in a discussion between people or among people and the MEPs, and that's our work for the next.
I mean, is it appropriate for Parliament as an institution to engage in this? I mean, I can see the logic of a direct social media being an engagement between citizens and their elected representatives, but you're an institution.
And we have to, of course, we have to respect the difference in the sense that we are allowed to inform. We can use social media to inform, of course. That's the first time through social media that we can really reach people in the member states, jumping over the typical Brussels filter of the Brussels correspondence, because a journalist in Brussels has to cover activities of 3, 4, 5 institutions at the same time. So even if they are, of course, the main source of information about what happens in Brussels, they are also at the same time the main filter. So the only way now to jump over this filter is connecting with all the other hundreds or thousands of journalists who are working in the member states, but much more important, the citizens. But there is another thing, which is interacting, and I think that interacting, connecting, debating, this is something to be in some way boosted by the Parliament or by the institution, but not done by the institution. This is something to be made by the members of the Parliament and the public opinion, the citizens.
The problem is, and I think we discussed this in the first session, we do not know, not only do we know well enough who we reach, we do not know what our messages actually do in their minds. I like to compare twiplomacy, as we call it. Twitter is basically tap dancing on the tube during rush hour. People might glance, but do they really care? And as long as we've not answered that question fully, we don't know what our messages actually do. This morning they said political party messages are instant death. Well, I can tell you some of the lines that we get from our communications department, if I put that out on Twitter, they just fall like a leak ball in a wet sand pit. It means nothing. So the question is, how do we get our message out there? What is our goal? And then we have to compete, and I think a previous speaker said this is basically asymmetrical warfare. If you look at the top 100 Twitter people, they're all entertainers, except for Barack Obama, who does not own his account, not even the White House, and Bill Gates. The others are Lady Gaga, Justin Bieber. So if the gauge is how many Twitter followers you have, we have to ask Justin Bieber for foreign policy advice. So if we want to get people and become interesting, as they said this morning, we have to become more entertaining. And the difficulty is, and I don't think we have an answer yet, how does that affect the message? Because if we change goal with objective and means, it's a very nice.
There's so much noise and so much misinformation. But the pushing out, if you wouldn't click on it, why would anybody else? Why would anybody be remotely interested in you opening a factory? I mean, they just wouldn't. These sort of grip and grimace pictures that people put out there, that's not exciting. They want to see a little bit more about the issues they care about. They want to see a bit more personality in the tweets. And I personally don't think that you lose credibility by being a bit human and a bit funny. And if you do show those sort of things, then you can recover quite quickly when you cock up, because we all do.
And too many times, public organisations see tweeting in itself as a goal, or being on Twitter as a strategy, without actually looking at what the core issue is. The connection with people and the way there is that lack of trust element. And that has nothing to do with Twitter. Obviously, social media can help you to address that issue, but you need that broader sense of purpose. So I think there's this false dichotomy between the online and the offline world. The second area where I think there's a fundamental false dichotomy is when we look at social media and traditional ways of communications. And I think the best way to look at that is in terms of the behavioral change. So the fact, if you look at small things, the fact that people consume news on their mobile, or they consume news on a newsstream and they click on links that people are sharing, the fact that a politician gives a speech and journalists are tweeting what they're saying, when they post their speech afterwards, it's redundant. People have followed it on Twitter because people were posting it while that politician was speaking.